So let me summarize a bit the landscape that I witnessed in my years of black hairs against gray. And if you ask me, media is responsible for the color of my hair today. And I'll talk about that a little later on, because there are some things media never anticipated, including an attempted coup in which it would have a major part. And very interesting on what the media landscape became after that. But I go back to the post-war days in this country, and Radio Trinidad was perhaps the only sound you heard from Port of Spain. And if you were lucky, at some point, the transmission of WVDI, which was the broadcast system of the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service that serviced the servicemen, and there are 3 services if you listen closely, to live and enjoy life in Trinidad and Tobago while we staved off the threat of war. So you had WVDI, and of course you had Radio Trinidad. And then somebody said, let us do something about the outside broadcast transmission of Radio Trinidad, which I think they use for races or sports or something. And they turned that into the wired service of the voice of rediffusion, which you could not get on your regular radio. The only radio station you got on your regular radio was Radio Trinidad. And that went on for a number of years until we came close to independence, and things started to open up a little bit and a little until it became an industry, I think very close to independence. Independence marked the start of television in the country, because I think it's the first major outside broadcast assignment they did. And those of you who like archives and material that are shot by the meager staff of Trinidad and Tobago Television will realize that it was a color coverage. The flag looked good. We got a glimpse of what the red, white, and black would be. And we settled for a medium that shot in color but transmitted in black and white. So we didn't have a full appreciation of the beauty of television until we were able to go into that era when color came on, and I just can't remember exactly when that did. So on the broadcast side, you had these systems. On the newspaper side, you had the Port of Spain Gazette, or the Chronicle, one of those, the Guardian. And that was the extent of your newspaper. But then as we moved closer to just after the independence, along came I think it was the Mirror first, and then they called it the Express, and that exists up to today. So you had the broadsheet Guardian. The Express took on a new form, and everybody said they loved their broadsheet. They didn't mind going. Sometimes you'd see a taxi going down the road, and you see this broadsheet Guardian covering the whole front of the vehicle. But the Express was neater with its tabloid size, and so that was another major development in the media in Trinidad and Tobago. I think I summarized I could call it from WVDI, Armed Forces Radio and Television Service, into Radio Trinidad, into the voice of rediffusion, with 610 Radio as the force that expanded the media landscape of those days. What we needed to do was to define a rule for these broadcasting systems. But like the rest of media in the country, the newspapers were well established. The electronic media was this aspect that you needed to really massage to get something out of it. And so you started to get the excellence of those days. Programs on television started to emerge as virtual agendas on every day that you went into listening and anticipating your program, which Hazel produced for the youngsters. Newscast, which was simply an announcer sitting down in a studio and reading to the lights and the cameras and not having much of a production to go with it. Read from his script on the desk, looked into the camera, and sometimes when he went back to the script could not identify his stories. We didn't invest much in prompters, so that what you had was a very slow-moving development of media in the country until that change of government in 1986 with a commitment to open up the airways, which came after a lot of discussion on what media could do for the country. The questions that needed to be answered was, whose development were you talking about? Were you talking about the development as a country with its citizens participating, or the development of the 36 men and women who sat in Parliament of the day, who once television came on and they saw what television could do, started to watch it with an eye on either using it or stopping it. I came in when it was quite late, and I tell you, some of the experiences was something that you never forget in life. TTT was born. The raising of the national flag was covered, not in color, as far as I remember. I think we see the colored tapes up to today, but it was in black and white when it transmitted, as far as I remember. Newspapers remained the way they were, and the discussion centered on the expansion of the landscape with the license granted to the television stations. Lasted for quite a while, until one day the Speaker of the House, I called him, Nissan Mohammed at the time, said, what about this expansion that you all were talking about for television? If I skipped out with radio, it means that radio was holding its own, but remaining there as a stepsister of the television system. What to do about television? That was the question. I made recommendations for things like getting television to cover the parliament of the country, which I considered sacrosanct. I considered it as some things that people should be exposed to, as against a program, half an hour on radio every night, or I think every Friday night when the government sat. I think we needed to expand. I thought at the time that we needed to expand that and take advantage of their desire to open up the media. And so I exploited the relationship with Nizam Mohammed, who was going to be Speaker of the House, and encouraged him to allow us to take our cameras into the Parliament and to cover the sittings of the House so that it could be broadcast via television to the citizenry of this country. It started to work, and then we discovered that some people, some of the members, could not appreciate the power of the medium. So that during the sitting, you would have ministers sharing nuts, peanuts, and doing all sorts of things, sleeping with their mouths open, not being too good in their presentation. And they started to complain bitterly but quietly that we were not focusing on the real developments in the parliament, only that people were sharing nuts among the membership and or sleeping with their mouths open. And the speaker, who was, I think was Mr. Wari, if I'm not mistaken, was given a mandate to say, yeah, we'll expand the coverage, but tell them that they will have to abide by some rules. The rules were not written. As far as I remember, I never had a document in front of me saying this is how you do parliament until I think I left TTT. Something came up. But we had to follow some rules after a little while, very informally, with us saying, if you see Mr. Francis, MP for Port of Spain, sleeping, please do not put the camera in. And we say, well, why must he sleep? It says something about the parliament. The word was, please follow the rules and take advantage of a kind of change in attitude by the government towards your request to expand what you were doing in Parliament, and that is carrying down every Friday afternoon 3 cameras to set up almost like an outside broadcasting unit to cover what was happening inside of the Parliament. And the Parliament channel, resurrects some extremely good work. You can look at the Parliament channel and get history lessons because they really unearth a lot of the material that was in there hiding, and it's good to talk to one of them down there to see where they got that material from. But they got enough material to allow them to run an effective channel of news, current affairs, features, backgrounders coming from the Parliament, which is a good thing. So that's a perspective that I think a lot of people should look at. It took about 20-25 years to really come into being. But we have a Parliament channel, which I think is copied by some islands in the Caribbean. And we can say that has made its mark and will continue to make its mark on the broadcast landscape.